Are you still out there picking rotting fruit? I want you to imagine a tree. This tree has 6 branches. A branch for your work and career, a branch for your relationships, one for your health, one for money, one for self-growth and development, and one for your peace of mind. On this tree, there is rotting fruit on every branch. You pick one piece off, another appears somewhere else. Why? Because the root of the tree is still sick. Hi, I'm Dr. Yoshi. Welcome to Rewire Lab. I want to ask you to stay with me for the next 20 minutes. Not because I'm going to tell you something you've never heard, because I'm going to tell you something you've heard and show you why it hasn't been enough. Here is the thing I keep returning to. When something genuinely resolves, not gets managed, not gets coped with, but actually resolves, the person it happens to doesn't usually say they feel better. They say something stranger. They say, "This just feels like who I am." They don't describe overcoming. They describe being. And the strangest part is, they can barely remember what they were fighting. That is what resolution looks like. Not victory, identity. Today, I want to show you 4 people for whom that happened. And I want to show you precisely why it happened to them, and not to the people who tried just as hard for much longer before them. David was 17 years old. Depression, anxiety, difficulty concentrating, substance abuse. His psychiatrist, Dr. Momaya, spent 3.5 years doing everything within the scope of responsible clinical practice: medication, therapy. David improved. But the day he could honestly say he was okay never came. Several of his branches always had rotting fruit on them. Dr. Momaya kept removing it, carefully, methodically, for 3.5 years. Then David developed severe abdominal pain. Not discomfort, debilitating, relentless pain with no identifiable origin. Specialist after specialist found nothing. They started him on morphine. When that wasn't sufficient, something stronger. Eventually, a fentanyl patch. David reached the point where basic function required medication. Dr. Momaya watched this happen and arrived, quietly, at the recognition that there was nothing left within his framework to try. He asked David one question: "Are you open to trying something different?" David said, "I have nothing left to lose." That was the beginning of MER, mental and emotional release. Within 3 months, all the medication was gone. The pain was gone. The anxiety was gone. The depression was gone. A year later, Dr. Momaya attended David's wedding. You're probably skeptical. I was too. So I looked at the data before I let myself believe anything. Patients who received MER alongside cognitive behavioral therapy reached remission in 37% fewer sessions than those receiving CBT alone, a retrospective study in Nevada. 90% of at-risk youth who received MER showed significant reductions in aggressive behavior, a study conducted in Jamaica. These are consistent, replicable outcomes. David's abdominal pain had no medical cause, but that is not the same as having no cause. The body and the mind are not separate systems with occasional communication. They are one continuous system. When emotional weight goes unresolved for long enough, the body becomes the only available channel. Headaches, back pain, digestive problems, chronic fatigue that no amount of sleep fixes. The body isn't malfunctioning, it's reporting. Dr. Momaya had been removing the health branch fruit for 3.5 years. The root had never been touched. When MER reached the root, the fruit stopped appearing. Not suppressed, not managed around, resolved, at the source. Notice what David didn't say afterward. He didn't say he felt better. He didn't describe recovery. He fell in love. He got married. The absence of the problem registered not as healing, but as simply being himself. Now, let me tell you about Mona. Mona spent 10 years in therapy for rage. Intense, uncontrollable anger that had cost her a marriage and multiple jobs and was beginning to affect her physical health. She worked with multiple therapists, seriously and consistently. The relationship branch, the work and career branch, the health branch. Rotting fruit appearing and reappearing for a decade. After 10 years, she had arrived at acceptance. Not peace, acceptance. I'll live with this for the rest of my life. At a seminar, she volunteered for a live MER demonstration. She raised her hand thinking, nothing changes. 10 minutes later, she opened her eyes with tears on her face and said, "My anger has disappeared. Why did I waste all that time in therapy?" And then, almost immediately, wait, that was too easy. How do I know if it's really gone? 3 years later, it was really gone. 10 years of management, 10 minutes of resolution. If resolution was available the whole time, what were those 10 years actually doing? I want you to hold that question, not as a criticism of her therapists, but as a structural observation about the framework they were working within. A framework that had decided, quietly and collectively, that management was the ceiling. And I want you to notice what Mona said. Not, "I feel better." Not, "I've healed." She asked why she'd wasted 10 years. Because it didn't feel like overcoming. It felt like she had simply become someone who didn't carry that anger. The absence of the fight was so complete she could only measure it in lost time. 1 in 5 adults is currently living with a diagnosable mental health condition. That number has not moved in 20 years, despite every pharmacological advance, every expansion of access to care, every public awareness campaign. We called it treatment when we were picking rotting fruit. The root, the one affecting all 6 branches simultaneously, was never the target. When the root changes, the whole tree changes. MER is designed to reach that root, and there is a precise, replicable mechanism for how it does. Your reaction is not a character flaw. It's an architecture. Let me show you the structure. Here's something most people have experienced and never had a satisfying explanation for. A colleague is dismissive in a meeting. It's minor. You know it's minor. But 6 hours later, you're still carrying it. The irritation won't resolve. You can't think it down. You find yourself wondering, why am I still bothered by something this small? You weren't reacting to what happened in that meeting. You were reacting to every emotionally similar event in your history, firing simultaneously. The brain stores memories in clusters, grouped by emotional signature. Every experience of dismissal, inadequacy, abandonment, or threat is connected. One present moment event activates the node. The entire network fires. The proportionality you feel isn't to what happened today. It's to everything that has ever rhymed with it. Within every cluster, there is a first event. The event that established the pattern, the original encoding. This is the root. In most cases, it is not what the person would identify as significant. It's something that was categorized as minor, forgettable, not worth mentioning. It may have occurred before the person had language to describe what they experienced, before the prefrontal cortex was sufficiently developed to process it accurately. But the amygdala was online. The hippocampus was encoding. A belief was formed from limited data in a context that no longer exists by a nervous system doing its best with what it had. I am not safe. I am not enough. I am not lovable. That belief has been running as background operational code ever since, across the work branch, the relationship branch, the health branch, invisibly across all six, shaping what you reach for, what you pull back from, what feels available and what doesn't. One root is rotting fruit on multiple branches at once. That is why addressing branches individually never finished the job. What MER does is structurally precise. It locates the origin event, the first domino, and releases the emotional activation stored there. When that activation is cleared, the downstream chain loses its charge. The memory is not erased. The experience, the information, the learning, all preserved. What changes is the automatic firing that has been producing the response without your consent. When the root heals, the whole tree changes. Not branch by branch, the tree. And here is what nobody tells you about what that actually feels like from the inside. It doesn't feel like healing. It doesn't feel like overcoming. It feels like this is just who you are now. The baseline itself shifts. You're not measuring yourself against who you were before the change because the measuring stick is gone. The context in which the old pattern made sense is simply no longer present. Mona didn't say, "I've overcome my anger." She said, "Why did I waste all that time?" There was no victory in her voice. There was bewilderment at lost time. Because it didn't feel like she had conquered something. It felt like she had simply never needed to carry it. The fight that occupied a decade of her life became, in retrospect, something that had happened to someone she used to be. That is the phenomenology of resolution. Not the absence of a problem, the absence of the architecture that produced it. None of them described getting better. Listen to what they said instead. I want to stay with that, the phenomenology of resolution, and show you what it looks like across different lives, different problems, different histories. Because what follows is not primarily evidence that MER works. It is evidence for something more specific. When resolution happens, it doesn't announce itself as victory. Lana came in presenting with chronic migraines. A thorough clinical history revealed that the migraines were the current expression of a sequence. Severe joint problems first, then persistent back issues, then stomach problems, then insomnia, then migraines. Each condition had been treated as a discrete presentation. Each one was managed, and each one was followed by a new symptom taking its place. Mapped together, the picture was not a series of separate health problems. It was a nervous system in sustained dysregulation, cycling through expressions because the source of that dysregulation had never been addressed. With careful listening, the history came to light. As a child, Lana had been taken by her father to another state, to a cult, where she was ritualistically abused for approximately 2 weeks. She had told almost no one. She had never connected this to her body. For decades, the emotional weight of that event had been using her physiology as the only available channel. This is not metaphor. It is the documented consequence of unresolved trauma on the body's stress response architecture. The body was doing exactly what it does when the emotional load is never directly addressed. MER does not require reliving the material in detail. The technique employs a dissociation process that allows the client to engage with the original event from a regulated, safe distance, observing a first-person memory from a third-person position. The amygdala activation is substantially reduced. Processing occurs without re-traumatization. The migraines stopped. The chain of physical symptoms stopped. Lana entered a healthy relationship. She had children. The aunt who first brought her to treatment says, years later, "She seems genuinely happy." She didn't describe recovery. Her aunt described happiness. The absence of the symptom wasn't the story. The life that became available was. Marcy had been terrified of public speaking for decades. Not anxious, terrified. Standing in front of a group produced shaking, sweating, and cognitive blanking. This had persisted through every professional opportunity she had watched pass because she couldn't walk through that particular door. Through MER, the root surfaced. As a young child, she had been physically beaten by her father for talking back. The fear was never about speaking. It was a neurological association, formed in childhood between being seen, being heard, and severe physical consequence, that had been running beneath every public-facing situation for decades. No one had looked for the encoding event. Every intervention had worked on the downstream expression. After the session, Marcy said, "Now I feel just a little nervousness that disappears the moment I walk up to the podium. I'm not sure public speaking will ever be my favorite thing to do, but I feel very confident doing it now, and it has opened several doors that would have stayed closed to me." She didn't describe conquering her fear. She described not having it anymore. The professional doors that had been structurally closed began to open, not because she pushed harder, but because the architecture that kept them closed was gone. The people who respond most profoundly to MER are rarely those with the most extreme histories. They are, consistently, the ones who have done the most work. The ones who can articulate their patterns with clinical precision, who understand every contributing factor, every origin story, every cognitive distortion, who have read the books, attended the therapy, built the insight, and still cannot stop the pattern from running when the trigger fires. I understand exactly why I do this. I have understood it for years. I cannot stop doing it. This is not a failure of effort or intelligence. It is a structural description. Insight activates the prefrontal cortex. The pattern is encoded in the limbic system. The prefrontal cortex cannot override the amygdala simply by understanding it better. That is not how the neural architecture works. Knowing why you react the way you do does not change the encoding. It changes your relationship to the reaction after it has already fired. MER changes the encoding. That is not a competition between approaches. Insight work and encoding level work are targeting different layers of the same system. Both are necessary. They are not interchangeable. I want to ask you something now that you've stayed with me this far. David, Mona, Lana, Marcy. These are not distant clinical stories. David is the person who has tried everything and can no longer remember what trying felt like. Mona is the one who stopped believing change was possible. Lana is the one who has been carrying something alone, in her body, without a name for it. Marcy is the one standing outside the door she has been unable to open for 20 years. Somewhere on your 6 branches, isn't there at least one piece of fruit that has been rotting for years? The thing you can't stop doing is not your character. It's a structure. You are probably someone who functions. You work. You maintain relationships. To most people around you, you appear fine. But alone, at a certain hour, you know what's there. The relationship that keeps taking the same shape, no matter who the other person is. The opportunity that keeps arriving and keeps not being taken for reasons you can't fully name. The reaction that keeps arriving before you can stop it, followed by the same regret for the 10th year in a row. The same way Mona's anger did before she gave up and accepted it as permanent. You've started to think, this is just who I am. I want to offer you a different reading. What you're calling your personality may be an encoding event, something formed in a child's nervous system in a context that no longer exists, to manage a situation that was genuinely threatening at the time. The encoding was appropriate then. It is not appropriate now. But it has never been updated because it has never been directly addressed. It was managed, worked around, reframed, analyzed, medicated. The structure itself was left intact. And as long as the structure is intact, the rotting fruit keeps coming. You keep picking. The branch looks different every time. Different relationship, different job, different symptom. But the root is the same root. And the root is reachable. Not through more insight, not through harder effort, through a process that goes to where the encoding lives and releases it, precisely, without re-traumatization, at the origin event. When that happens, you won't describe it as a breakthrough. You won't write a gratitude entry about it. You'll just notice, somewhere in an ordinary week, that the thing you used to carry is simply not there. And like Mona asking why she wasted 10 years, you'll find the lost time more remarkable than the change. Because the change will feel like it was always true. That ceiling is not a feature of your character. It is a feature of a specific structure in your nervous system. Structures can be addressed. This one can be reached. The tree in bloom. Lana set down what she had been carrying alone for decades. David was found, somewhere beneath 3.5 years of medication, still intact. Mona became someone who didn't carry anger and spent her first moments of freedom wondering why it took so long. Marcy walked through doors that had been closed since she was a child. None of them were weak. None of them weren't trying. The structure had simply never been reached. That is a precise, specific, correctable thing. When the root is reached, carefully, without re-traumatization, at the origin event, the outcomes don't feel like healing. They feel like clarity, like the static finally going quiet, like becoming, without drama or announcement, simply who you were before the encoding told you otherwise. You are not your encoding. You are the person who exists when the encoding is resolved. MER is one of the most direct paths I have found to that version of you. If something in this episode named something you recognize in yourself, the next step is not a commitment, a program, or a years-long undertaking. It is a single conversation about what you're carrying and whether this is the right tool to address it. The link to work with me directly is in the show notes. If I'm outside your location or availability, the directory of certified MER master practitioners through the Empowerment Partnership is there too. Trained, qualified people who do this work with precision. And if this episode reached something you recognize in someone else, pass it to them. That's all. No framing required. Just a door. Until next time, rewire the brain, change your life. This was Dr. Yoshi. Disclaimer. This podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical or psychological diagnosis or advice. MER should only be practiced by qualified, trained professionals. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, please contact a licensed professional immediately. This episode was produced based on the following work: Mental and Emotional Release by Dr. Matt James. Mental and Emotional Release is a registered trademark of the Empowerment Partnership. Copyright Dr. Matt James. All rights reserved. This content is produced and used for educational purposes based on the concepts and research of the copyright holder.